Behind every headline lies a story of mystery, tragedy, and justice. Welcome to World True Crime, where we uncover the shocking, untold truths from every corner of the globe. People don't realize this, but Australia is home to over 10,000 beaches spread across 50,000 kilometers of coastline. Over 85% of Australians live by the beach. The beaches here are prime tourist attractions. Gazing at the clear blue water, breathing in the fresh and salty air, and feeling the golden and warm sand beneath your feet sounds heavenly to most people. But for the Cordingley family, the beach isn't an emanation of serenity, freedom, and beauty. Rather, it is a horrific reminder of a crime that left them scarred with pain and despair forever. 24-year-old Toyah Cordingley was minding her own business, walking along the shore of the quaint and secluded Wangetti Beach, approximately 38 kilometers away from her hometown, Cairns, with her dog, Indy, on a sunny summer afternoon on October 21, 2018. But afternoon turned into night, and Toyah never returned home. Alarmed, her loved ones searched for Toyah first thing the next morning, hoping that she was safe. But what they tragically found was Toyah's lifeless body. Everyone in Cairns was plagued by horror and disbelief after Toyah's ill-fated end. But questions were looming over everyone's heads. Why was Toyah attacked? Who was Toyah's attacker? What led to such a horrible incident? The case of Toyah Cordingley is shocking and downright depressing. And while Australia may be thousands of miles away for many of us, it's a case that hits too close to home for most. Toyah Jade Cordingley was born on June 14, 1994, to parents Troy and Vanessa in Cairns, Queensland, along Australia's northeastern coast. She was the only child of her parents, and a family of 3 had a good life, but not for long. When Toyah was still very young, her parents got divorced. Even though Toyah's parents loved her to bits, their marriage wasn't working out. Troy went on to marry a woman named Mary, and Vanessa married a man named Darren Gardiner and went on to have 2 more children, Jack and Lena. Even though divorces can have a significant impact on the child involved, Toyah didn't seem to mind. If anything, she was excited to be a part of 2 families. She was adjusting really well to her family's new dynamic. She even had a great relationship with her step-siblings, and everyone loved the vibrant and cheerful Toyah. Family and friends defined Toyah as carefree and adventurous. She had a warm and loving personality, and she was the person who said yes to new adventures. Toyah loved fairies and anything mystic, and she was very outgoing with her style, especially her hair and clothes. Toyah changed her hair frequently. Sometimes she would have bright pink hair, other times it would be purple, and sometimes it would be fire engine red. In October 2018, though, Toyah was sporting an icy blonde hair color. Toyah's parents were no different either. They were unapologetically expressive with their styles. Sleeves of tattoos, funky hairstyles, and an alternative approach to life were things that were normal in the Cordingley Gardiner family. All in all, Toyah and her family weren't afraid to freely express their style. Toyah also adored animals, so much so that she took a job as a kennel attendant at Paws and Claws Refuge and Boarding Center in Port Douglas. Her love for animals can also be seen in her last social media post, which was in October 2018, reading, "No matter how talented, rich, or intelligent you are, how you treat animals tells me all I need to know about you." I couldn't agree more. Paws and Claws counselor Michael Kerr defined Toyah as a beautiful, loving soul and a loyal employee. According to Michael, Toyah could calm down the most aggressive of dogs within minutes, and that was just a gifted quality of hers. Not long after, Toyah started a new job, working in a pharmacy called Whole Life in Earlville, a suburb of Cairns. But her heart was still with animals. She continuously volunteered with animals and even kept lots of pets. Toyah was also in a 2-year-long relationship with a guy named Marco, and the two bonded over their love for animals, specifically dogs. Marco and Toyah also had the same goals in life, and the two were head over heels for each other. Toyah's family was also over the moon for her, as she had found a guy who genuinely made her happy. The couple also had a dog, a German Shepherd Mastiff, and Great Dane mix named Indy, who was essentially a gentle giant. Toyah and Marco moved in together with their pets, and life was perfect for them. But this would all change in the most heartbreaking way. On October 21, 2018, the Cordingley family would be struck with something so unexpected and so tragic. Sunday, October 21, 2018, started out just like any other day for Toyah. She had errands planned, and one of them was to take her dog, Indy, out for a walk on Wangetti Beach, about 38 kilometers north of Cairns, roughly halfway between it and Port Douglas. Toyah worked her shift at Whole Life Pharmacy, handing out camel milk samples to the customers. And yes, you heard correctly, camel's milk. You learn something new every day. Anyway, after work, Toyah made her way to Rusty's Market, which was close to the waterfront, to pick up some produce for dinner that night. She was actually seen on CCTV footage between 12 to 1 p.m., carrying a colorful basket, donned in a light-colored crochet top, with her hair up. After her trip to Rusty's Market, Toyah returned home and informed Marco about her trip to the beach with Indy. She left the house at around 2:30 p.m. with Indy and made her way to Wangetti Beach in her 2009 blue Mitsubishi Lancer. She parked it near the southern entrance of the beach, and then it is assumed that she went for a walk on the beach with Indy. Wangetti Beach is a remote shoreline with 4 kilometers of coastline and no facilities apart from a parking lot and the highway. The beach is known as a local secret, and it is very quaint. But Toyah would never make it back home for dinner. When hours passed and afternoon darkened into evening, Marco started to worry about Toyah, as she wasn't answering her phone and hadn't come home yet. At 9 p.m., Marco called Jack, Toyah's stepbrother, and asked if she was there with him, as she hadn't returned home. Jack was also immediately alarmed, as Toyah hadn't come to visit him. He went straight into his mom Vanessa's room, who was getting ready for bed at that time. As soon as she heard the knock and saw her son's visibly nervous and shaken demeanor, Vanessa felt it in her gut that something was wrong. Jack went on to tell Vanessa that Toyah was gone since the afternoon and no one could reach her. The police were immediately contacted, and 24-year-old Toyah was officially reported missing at around 10:50 p.m. Vanessa even called Troy, her ex-husband and Toyah's dad. Together, along with friends and family, they started looking for Toyah in their neighborhood and spread the word on social media. The police suggested that they look for Toyah in the morning because Wangetti Beach was essentially a pitch-black pit of sand and water at that time. With the high tide, it was impossible to find anything, and it could have even been dangerous for searchers. While the police's suggestion was reasonable, Toyah's family was eager to start their search as they wanted to find her immediately, no matter what time of day it was. But without having any luck during the evening, the investigators and Toyah's family eventually agreed to look for her first thing in the morning. The 22nd of October rolled around, and early in the morning, Toyah's family, armed with flashlights, went to Wangetti Beach. There they found something that bloomed hope in their fearful hearts: Toyah's car. It was still parked there, but there was no sign of Toyah. The family was relieved at that moment because it meant that Toyah hadn't left the beach and gone somewhere else. When the group made it to the shore, the tide was still high. Although there was still no sign of Toyah, Vanessa found something, or rather someone. Vanessa's eye wandered towards a bush, and she felt as though something was moving behind it. When she made her way towards it, she saw Indy, Toyah's pet dog, tied to a tree so tightly that it was unable to sit. This clearly wasn't done by Toyah. She was a die-hard animal lover and put her pet's comfort before anything else, so it would have been impossible for her to tie Indy's leash so unbearably tight. Troy and Vanessa freed Indy by cutting the leash, and Vanessa made her way to the car to charge her phone, since it had run out of battery. This was probably a divine sign because as the sun started to rise and the tide began to wash away, Troy made a horrendous discovery that no mother or father should ever have to witness. When the tide slowly retreated, Troy noticed something poking out of the sand. As he approached closer, his mind registered what he was looking at. It was a human foot. About 800 meters away from where Toyah parked her car, at around 7:45 a.m., her body was tragically discovered by none other than her father, buried in a shallow grave. The sight of his only child in such a terrifying state is forever burned in Troy's mind. Toyah was disrobed and had sustained violent injuries, possibly from a knife. Vanessa was informed of her daughter's discovery and tragic passing by Jack, her brother. She was struck with shock, disbelief, and then unadulterated horror and grief. Her 24-year-old, life-loving daughter had been taken away from her in such a tragic way that she couldn't do anything but cry. Because of how grave Toyah's injuries were, Vanessa wasn't even allowed to see her daughter as she was being taken away from the beach. It's so harrowing for a parent to go through this. Troy and Vanessa knew that their lives wouldn't be the same anymore. The Queensland detectives also had things to worry about, and primarily it was: who attacked Toyah? Was it someone Toyah knew? Or was it a random attack? The city of Cairns was shocked by Toyah's unfortunate passing, as she didn't have any enemies and was the kindest, gentlest person anyone knew, and they were scared that the perpetrator was still out there, and no one knew who they were. Even though Wangetti Beach was a beautiful place to visit, it wasn't the safest for women. This sandy beach had an uncomfortable history that made it unsafe. See, there were multiple occasions when girls and even young women, including Toyah's best friend Megan, had gone to the beach for a fun getaway when they saw random men peering out of the bushes, watching them. Some of the incidents were downright indecent and uncomfortable for the girls because men would disrobe and perform inappropriate acts in front of them. This string of incidents left girls and women with no choice but to flee the scene in obvious discomfort and fear. Since it was a remote place surrounded by bushes, shrubs, and a highway, Wangetti Beach became a hotspot for predators and vile people. To be at this beach in the presence of friends was bad enough, but when you consider that Toyah had been completely alone that day, aside from her dog, well, the story speaks for itself. So the question was, is this what happened to Toyah? Did one of these predators manage to grab her and do the unthinkable? Amidst the investigators trying to uncover clues that could lead to answers for the grieving Cordingley family, Toyah's funeral was held on November 2nd, 2018, and hundreds of people flocked to say their final goodbyes to a bright young woman whose life was tragically and unexpectedly cut short. What was so heartbreaking was that Marco, Toyah's boyfriend, attended the funeral with Indy, who was with Toyah on the day she was tragically attacked. I know people often joke about what if dogs were able to talk, but in all seriousness, if there were ever a time when a dog should be able to speak up, it would be right now. Indy likely saw the entire attack from beginning to end, but those memories are simply etched in the dog's mind, never to be released. At the end of the funeral, Toyah was laid to rest with freshly picked flowers, surrounded by the people she impacted so deeply. Meanwhile, the investigators taped off the beach, and divers and K-9 units were called to find any trace of another person who could be Toyah's killer. DNA testing, surveillance footage, forensics, witness reports, everything was checked by the police. They even checked cell tower activity on the day and time Toyah was at the beach. The detectives also had obvious suspects at the time of the crime, including Toyah's boyfriend Marco and her stepdad Darren. But they were soon ruled out because not only did they have airtight alibis, it also didn't make much sense as to why any of them could hurt Toyah. Moreover, there was another very confusing part about this whole case, and that was the question: why was Indy unharmed? Usually when an evil person commits heinous crimes, they unfortunately don't leave pets unscathed. But to investigators, Indy's survival meant that the perpetrator was possibly someone Toyah and Indy both knew, which could explain why the dog didn't attack when Toyah was nabbed by her assailant. But it was soon found out that Indy was an obedient dog by nature. Even though the dog's size would make people run for the hills, Indy was affectionate even towards strangers, so the idea of Indy being willing to tear down Toyah's attacker, well, it seems fairly unlikely. Anyways, the investigation was massive and even included alternative involuntary DNA testing of residents living near the crime scene, so that the investigators could shrink their suspect list down. Investigators also looked at cars driving down the Captain Cook Highway, and finally, after 6 months of combing through all the footage and cell tower details, the investigators had a suspect based on dashcam footage, geolocation, and a bizarre car that was seen swerving down the highway that overlooked the beach on the same day Toyah went missing. When police ran the plates, they came across two very shocking things. Firstly, the car wasn't registered to the area where it was seen, so it could have been someone who was simply visiting Wangetti Beach. But the second detail was more alarming, and it was that the person who owned the car left Australia on the day of Toyah's disappearance, taking a flight to India. This was alarming to the investigators because now catching the perpetrator was going to be a cross-continent task. But who was the man and what was his connection to Toyah? As police honed in on their primary suspect, they revealed that he was a 34-year-old Indian man named Rajwinder Singh. He made the move from India to Queensland years ago and was currently working as a geriatric nurse in a hospital about 90 kilometers south of Cairns. When the detectives visited the hospital where Rajwinder worked, coworkers remembered him acting weird and closed off a couple of weeks before 21st October. Rajwinder was apparently suffering from depression and chose to stay in his own company for the most part. He never really got out much and didn't associate with his coworkers outside of work. But this didn't sound alarming at first. Sometimes people just prefer to keep to themselves. Anyways, the police made their next stop, which was none other than Rajwinder's home. Unsurprisingly, they didn't find him there, but rather his wife and 3 children, one of them being a newborn. According to Rajwinder's wife, he had left Queensland coincidentally on 21st October, heading for Sydney. There, he stayed with his sister for the night before catching a flight to India. Rajwinder's movement and hasty actions further solidified the investigators' suspicions, but there was more. When police talked to witnesses, They stated that Rajwinder's face, neck, and even hands were littered with scratches and bite marks, which is very alarming. Australian investigators knew that they had to work together with Indian law enforcement to track down Rajwinder and extradite him back to Australia to face the law, because these wounds he'd sustained had almost certainly come from Toyah. At least, this was the theory detectives were operating under at this time. But it wasn't going to be easy to track this man down, and from that point onwards, a long and brutal waiting game began for Toyah's family, which was frustrating but inevitable. Extradition processes can take a lot of time to reach completion because you are talking about two countries coming to the same page regarding the presented evidence to catch a criminal. It can essentially be a court case in and of itself, and we all know that many court cases take years to reach a conclusion. Even though Australian police knew that Rajwinder was in India after confirming with Indian detectives, things weren't going to be smooth sailing. The Australian government wanted to present rock-solid evidence against Rajwinder, which they had in the form of DNA found at the crime scene. And they didn't want to scare Rajwinder away because he seemed to have a tendency to flee when things didn't go his way. The process of making a brief of extradition took Australian law enforcement almost 2.5 years. All the while, Toyah's family was growing impatient by the slowness of the law, as they wanted justice to be served for their innocent daughter, who unknowingly and possibly became a victim of Rajwinder. But as the brief was sent, nothing was really done. Indian investigators still needed to find Rajwinder, which was easier said than done. The local authorities in Australia even offered up a massive $1 million reward for information leading to Rajwinder's arrest. Thankfully, the promise of money worked, and less than a month later, a significant tip came in that would lead police to Rajwinder. According to the person who gave the tip, Rajwinder was now part of a religious group, wore a turban, had grown a long beard, and had lost a lot of weight too. Essentially, from what we can gather, Rajwinder was trying to blend in with the crowd, which is so infuriating to know that he knew good and well that he was a wanted man. Moreover, the person also gave detectives a crucial piece of information that would ultimately lead to them catching and arresting Rajwinder. See, Rajwinder was about to visit New Delhi in a couple of days for a doctor's appointment, and the detectives knew that this was their only chance. Finally, on November 25, 2022, 4 years after Toyah's disappearance and subsequent passing, 38-year-old Rajwinder Singh was arrested in New Delhi and held in a jail cell awaiting extradition. Surprisingly, Rajwinder soon confessed to the crime in front of an Indian court. When asked about the motive, Rajwinder's answer was vague yet terrifying. According to Rajwinder, on October 21, he apparently got into a heated argument with his wife and left for Cairns to cool down. He oddly had a kitchen knife with him at that time, and once he reached Wangetti Beach, he sat on the sand, cut up some fruits, and was enjoying some peace and quiet. This was when he heard a dog barking at him. This was, sadly, Indy, who was with Toyah. The incessant barking angered Rajwinder to no end, and he started yet another argument, but this time with Toyah. During the argument, Rajwinder, in a rageful haze, pulled out the knife and launched a vicious and frenzied attack on Toyah. It is speculated from the injuries Rajwinder sustained that Toyah fought for her life, but Rajwinder overpowered her, and tragically, Toyah lost her life in the end. What was so harrowing was that the only witnesses of this horrific scene were Toyah, Rajwinder, and Indy, whom Rajwinder tied to a tree after burying Toyah's body in a shallow grave and fled the scene. It is so unbelievable that Toyah lost her life at the hands of a man who she didn't even know. She was simply enjoying a walk on the beach with her beloved dog when she crossed paths with an unstable Rajwinder, who mercilessly attacked and eventually ended Toyah's life over such a minor issue, which I don't know if you can even call that. It's just a dog doing what dogs do, bark. It's totally normal behavior. Toyah lost her life for literally no reason at all. On January 24, 2023, the Delhi court approved the extradition of Rajwinder Singh, and on February 28, he flew from Delhi Airport to Melbourne Airport to face prosecution for ending the life of 24-year-old Toyah Cordingley. He was eventually charged with murder in March 2023. You would think that this was finally it, but Rajwinder's defense was nowhere near done. On May 1, 2024, a pre-trial hearing was held, which opened a whole new can of worms. See, the court was presented with evidence that Toyah was in a secret relationship with a man named Tyson Franklin, a podiatrist whom she met a few weeks before her passing. A series of text messages between Tyson and Toyah were also presented by the defense in court. In the messages, Toyah confided in Tyson about how Marco was angry at the world, and that those emotions were projected on her. Tyson even appeared in front of the court and stated that he and Toyah had chemistry. Tyson also confessed that he was in contact with Toyah via text until her passing and that Toyah told him that she was considering moving to a new place by herself. Shockingly, Tyson was questioned by the investigators at the time of Toyah's disappearance, although he conveniently left out the part about him and Toyah secretly seeing each other, but he confessed to them being involved with one another in court during a cross-examination. Now, it is unclear whether Toyah was actually seeing someone else, besides Marco, her boyfriend of 2 years, or if this is just a ploy by the defense to deter the actual course of the case. While Tyson and Toyah certainly were friendly with one another, I wasn't able to find any concrete proof that the two were romantically involved. The reason I tend to believe that they weren't is because Toyah's plans for the future, for example, moving out on her own, didn't seem to include Tyson. She strictly said she wanted to get away from Marco for a while, nothing else. Regardless, this revelation has brought about some new opinions on Toyah's case. The vast majority of people still believe that Rajwinder Singh is responsible for Toyah's death, as his fleeing the country following Toyah's demise was very dodgy, considering that his wife just gave birth to their newborn child. He had sustained mysterious injuries. His car was seen in the area at the time Toyah disappeared. He also confessed to the crime, although he later recanted this confession. On top of that, he even tried to change his appearance to blend in with the crowd, all of which is highly suspicious. But there is another opinion of some people that Rajwinder wasn't the one to attack Toyah. Rather, it was someone close to her. This opinion points fingers at either Marco or Tyson. Some believe it's possible that Marco took Toyah's life because he found out about Tyson. But again, there is no evidence to suggest that Toyah and Tyson were romantically involved. Also, Marco was clear as a suspect very early on, and Tyson didn't seem to have any ill will toward Toyah whatsoever. So Tyson can't be put on a crime scene either. There are so many unknowns in this case, and unfortunately, we will have to wait for the trial to find out how all of this really unfolds. Speaking of the trial, as of the most recent updates, Rajwinder's trial for Toyah's murder has been delayed to February 2025 after Rajwinder's attorney, Angus Edwards, applied for an adjournment at the pre-trial hearing held on July 19, 2024. The reason for the adjournment was that the defense team needed time to go through heaps of evidence to properly represent Rajwinder and his involvement in Toyah's passing. The Cordingley family is finally at the point where they feel like justice will be served to Toyah. After spending 6 long years waiting for updates on Toyah's case, the painstakingly lengthy extradition process and the eventual extradition of Rajwinder Singh, Toyah's suspected killer, have taken a toll on the Cordingley family. They lost faith in the Australian justice system, all the while facing harsh criticism from people around them. Toyah's mom, Vanessa, expressed her sadness at a certain group of people in the community who brutally judged the family and their so-called alternative lifestyle. It is just so heartbreaking that an already bereaved family is being constantly bombarded with such cruel words, just for being themselves. I'm telling you, across the globe, we seem to live in a culture that constantly preaches about equality and inclusion. We keep seeing all these movements and hearing all these statements from people who are constantly preaching about equality. But let's be painfully honest. People only want equality for those whose lifestyle aligns with their own. That's the God's honest truth. The fact that people are badgering Toyah's family just because they want to be a little unusual, shame on you. The case of Toyah Cordingley may be on its way to closure, but it's not there yet, and this is what makes everything so unfulfilling and disheartening. Toyah was a young and vibrant woman who had her whole life ahead of her. But everything that she planned for her future crumbled, and she would never get to live her life to the fullest. Toyah's family is not even close to moving on with their lives. With Rajwinder's trial due in February 2025, the Cordingley family is counting down the days until they can finally move on to the road of healing from this irrevocable loss. If Rajwinder was the person who snuffed the life out of innocent and unsuspecting Toyah, then this is so frightening. To think that you can randomly cross paths with someone so volatile and unstable is just beyond eerie. This case is a shining example that danger can be found literally anywhere. Broken, disturbed people are walking among us, and we probably pass by multiple people like Rajwinder every single day without knowing it. We can only hope that the trial can hold answers for the Cordingley family as well as the closure that they need to finally move on with their lives after experiencing such a perpetual nightmare. The world is vast, but no crime can hide forever. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows. Until next time, stay safe and vigilant.